My talk is about creating meaningful change. Now, for me, I'm an innovation consultant and coach. I help people create meaningful change for them, creating real change. So what I want to do is talk you through some of my ideas that really talk about how you can make change effectively and what I mean by meaningful, which is both actually for the general good, for your own good, and lasting. And actually making change is hard. I think it's one of the biggest challenges that we have. Yeah, how do you actually make things better? A lot of us, you know, this conference is full of people with really exciting ideas and really exciting technology, but it just, like, I know lots of it's going to fail. I have 20 years back in technology and startups and innovation, and I've seen so many great ideas not work. So I got really, really interested in what makes stuff happen and what doesn't. So along the way, I discovered complexity theory. Complexity theory is a branch of kind of computer science, maths, that talks about really how much we can know, how much we can predict, and places limits on certainly the amount that we can do now. Whether or not we can ever do it is a question for philosophers and mathematicians that's well above my pay grade. But what it means is now there's a limit to what we can know and a limit to what we can anticipate. So how can you actually change the future? How can you make the future better when you can't really predict it, when you can't know what's going to happen? The other side of this work that I've done is, alongside the business and technology, is a load of is psychology and consciousness work. And my interest is really in what the experience of creating change is like, and what conscious practices, what practices we can adopt as people to make that change more likely to happen. Now, I don't intend to have a lot of slides, and I would like this to be as interactive as possible. So if anyone has any questions, shout, open the mic up, just talk, and I'll see if I can answer stuff. It can sound like a pretty techie and overwhelming topic, but underneath it all, it's pretty. Hopefully it will ring true for you on an intuitive level as well as on a kind of intellectual level. And for me, that being able to do both, to be able to understand something on an intuitive level and on a logical intellectual level, is actually the key to making meaningful action and being able to use something that you've learned. So what I will do is I am going to start up the whiteboard and draw a little bit. So having said that, who here has come across any complexity theory at all? Could anyone who's done that, I'm going to stop sharing so I can actually see you. If anyone's like come across complexity at all, let me know, because it will tell me where to pitch this. Or is this a completely new idea? No complexity theory, nothing. Completely new, exciting, interesting.
For me, it's totally new. So Eugene here. Yeah.
Brilliant. Cool. Okay, so we'll start from scratch. We'll start from simple. So complexity theory came out of a branch of kind of fairly maverick polymath people who studied either maths or computer science on one side, but also maybe biology or psychology or sociology on the other side, and got really interested in where those things converged. And one of the core things that really founded the field was this idea of a complex adaptive system. Now, a complex adaptive system is, well, I'll take you through what each of the words mean. A complex system is one that you can't just look at it and predict what it's going to do. It's easier to run it than it is to try and figure out what it's going to do, basically. The quickest way to figure it out is just to see what happens. That's what makes it complex. What makes it adaptive is, and this is a unique feature, this is a subset of complex systems, is that it's self-sustaining. It responds to the environment so that it can take inputs, either energy or information or physical matter, and it can spit out knowledge and then make itself better at getting those. It responds to changes in the availability of those. So it's a way of conceiving a certain sort of type of organization of stuff that is self-sustaining, that carries on growing. And one of the most obvious self-sustaining systems is any living organism. You know, it changes, it adapts, it takes stuff in, it learns, it responds, it takes more stuff in. So it's a really interesting model for how we understand things. Now, one of the other weird things about complex adaptive systems is you can get kind of stacks of them. So you can have a big complex adaptive system made up of little complex adaptive systems, all acting as individual things. So in the case of us, in the case of humanity, that is, we're complex adaptive systems. We're living things, so we are. And our society is also a complex adaptive system. So we've got this kind of weird nest where we're dependent on the bigger system, and it's dependent on us and our survival, because if we disappear, it collapses. So it's a really interesting lens to look at things through. But one of the things that complexity tells you is that you can't really predict quite how any change that you're going to make to a complex system is going to respond. They have all sorts of weird things. So I don't know if any of you read The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell, which talks about how you get this non-linear change. And non-linear change means you push something a little bit, it changes a little bit. Maybe it doesn't change at all. You push it a little bit more and nothing happens. And then you push it a little bit more and then bam, tips, changes. So that happens in complex systems. That doesn't happen in simple linear systems. And so it's a really, really important thing. Again, it's about what we can't predict. So what that means, what I'm going to take you through is another quick model that comes more from organizational stuff, so it's relevant to making change in organizations, about complex systems. So hold on, screen sharing. So let me draw you this model. Who here has who's come across the Keneffing model? If you want, if you have, shout please, because I won't be able to see you waving. So I'm going to draw 4 squares, and these 4 squares, squarish anyway, represent different domains, different ways of understanding systems, different types of systems. And we will start at simple systems, or sometimes called obvious systems. So simple or obvious systems are simple and obvious. I'll use the example of computers to describe these systems. So on a computational level, a simple system is a logic gate, on off, simple switch, you know, binary, whatever, simple. A complicated system is a whole load of simple systems stuck together. Okay, I've got some chat, hold on. Cool. Okay, couple of messages, great stuff. Cool, nice one. Okay, great stuff, thank you. I'll share contact details at the end, but if anyone does have to leave me your details and I'll get back to them. So right, simple obvious system. So next stage up, in terms of how sophisticated the system is a complicated system. A complicated system is maybe, say, a computer itself. It does pretty much what you tell it to do. It doesn't display any really weird quirks, but what you tell it to do isn't immediately obvious in how you use it. You have to learn to use it. You have to learn to integrate with it. The next stage up in terms of sophistication is a complex system. Now, a complex system could be the internet. Yeah, the internet is effectively it's a whole load of computers stuck together, and they behave in weird ways. You know, there's nothing, you can't predict how the internet is going to behave from knowing how computers behave. So it's kind of weird. And then finally, you have chaotic systems. And chaotic systems are pretty much what they sound like, really. They're systems where you don't know what to do. They're systems where you have no information, you just don't have a model for working through the system. Now, the Keneffing model, oh yes, and the gaps between, so the catch with the Keneffing model is if you try and use the approach from one system, from one of these, in one of the other ones, you get into trouble. You fall into disorder, which means what you do doesn't work. What you do doesn't move you forward. And so that is kind of a problem. So what we need to do is we need to orient in the right domain to actually move forward, to take effective action. I'm not going to dig too deeply today into what that is, though that's actually a really important thing. What I want to do instead is start to make this relevant to you and how you are and your consciousness. So one way to conceive people, as I've said, as yourself, everyone, any individual, is as a complex adaptive system. Now, the complex adaptive system of a person, in terms of our kind of on a scientific level, looks like our mind and our body, our brain and our body, and it's all very material. On a phenomenological level, on an experiential level, though, we experience ourselves kind of as a mind slightly separate from the body very often. And this is the source of Descartes' mind-body duality, an idea which, frankly, I think set thinking back 400 years. But, we're getting to fix it now, so that's good. So what we really are, though, is multiple complex adaptive systems within the overall mind-body system. And the two most important systems within that, or the two most significant for us in terms of our human experience, are our left brain and our right brain. Now, the reason that left brain and right brain are somewhat separate and represent to some degree separate systems is because one of the advantages of being in a bigger system is that you can specialize, and specialization makes you more efficient. So by separating the two halves of our brain instead of running them together, we can specialize, we can do things quicker. But the cost of specializing is that that function is either less capable or completely incapable of dealing with whatever the whole system can deal with. So we have actually a fairly significantly specialized left brain and a fairly significantly specialized right brain. Raises the question, what are those specializations? How do they feel? So how many of you, I mean, you probably come across this slightly pop science kind of idea of like, oh, the right brain's all creative and blah, 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 and it draws pictures and it's pretty and it's colorful and it's whatever. And the left brain's all logical and fixed and scientific and mathematical. Like all cliches, there's some truth in them, but it's not complete. The best way I've found to really differentiate the function of the two brains is that the left brain is about taking action successfully. The right brain is about working out what action to take. So that's a really important thing to understand. And to be successful, you need to be able to do both. It doesn't matter. You can imagine, say, just imagine a sheep in a field. It's just there eating, and it's eating the grass, and it's found some grass. And it needs to know when to move on to find the next field, and it needs to look up. If it just keeps chewing, it'll eventually run out of grass. Equally, if it just keeps exploring, thinking that there's always going to be a really nice, juicy field full of grass just over the next hill, it'll never eat. And in both those cases, eventually it'll starve. It'll stop being a viable, sustainable system. So what we need to do is we need to balance the two. We need to balance both the left brain typical style of taking and making something happen versus the right brain typical style of exploring and understanding. So what's interesting, what I really like about the Keneffing framework is that these two brain systems actually map quite well onto this framework. So the right brain tends to be on the left hand side, and the left brain tends to be on the right hand side. And there's a good reason for that. You'll often find people do make this map automatically. It's weird that we think of the left hand as kind of creative, and the left hand side of things as the more fluid, and the right hand side is the side that has writing and has logic and all of that. That's because the left hand half of our brain controls the right hand side of our body, and the right hand side controls the left hand. So just to clear up why this is a slightly weird thing, and why I will take the convention of putting the right brain on the left hand side of the page, because that's where it belongs according to our crossed over bodies. So the right brain is really good at dealing with the highly complex. It's the intuitive side of thinking. And intuition is really, really powerful because it can deal with far, far more complexity, far, far more input than the left-hand brain can. The left-hand brain gets overwhelmed by too much data. It needs it filtered out. And it's the right-hand side of the brain that can do that for us. So what happens is we find what's good in the field, what's good in our environment with our right-hand brain. It's oriented towards things that help us do that, which are things like relationships and networks and complexity and creativity, and that's the side that does that. Then the left brain is all about how we benefit from that, how we take what we find in the environment and make good use of it, so we can carry on, so we can be a sustainable system, so we can carry on living and living well. And what we need to do is successfully cycle between those two things. To be successful, we need to not get stuck in one side. And there are some quirks of psychology and quirks of the systems in which we live that mean that we tend to get stuck in the left-hand side. And that's a dangerous place to be. To some degree, that's the place we are right now. And it's causing the kind of struggles that we are having right now. So the left-hand side of the brain is very much the thinking brain. It's the logical thinking brain. In most people, it's what's in consciousness most of the time. It's your kind of rhetorical brain. When you think in words, you're using largely the left-hand side of your brain. When you're kind of embedded in, you're in listening to an amazing piece of music, you're out running in nature, and you're just in sensory information and you're not kind of thinking at all, you're in your right-hand side of your brain, or actually in the sensory side of things. So what you need to do is actually balance the two and learn when the right one is appropriate to use. And for me, that's really a question of consciousness. This is where the conscious side of this comes in. Your ability to successfully shift between the two of these approaches largely determines your success in the world. There are smaller things, obviously, and bigger things structurally. But in terms of what you can actually influence, the relationship between the two sides of your mind, the experiencing mind, are the biggest thing that you can change. And more importantly, by changing those, they allow you to make meaningful change in the outside world. So what I mean when I say meaningful change is that we exist in this complex adaptive system. So we both depend on it, and other elements of the system, other people depend upon us. Our survival is very strongly tied with the ongoing functioning of society as a whole. But we also have to meet our needs whilst we're doing that. So we can't just completely give ourselves over to the greater good, because then we don't eat, we don't have a house, we don't pay the rent, we don't buy food. So we need to balance those two. And for me, the real key thing is to actually find the overlap point between those two things. So the goal is to find the intersection between your needs and the needs of the wider system, the needs of other people, so that you can serve both of them in what you do. That creating that intersection point and the systems that enable that, the processes that enable that, and the knowledge that enables that are the essence of meaningful and of meaningful innovation. And they are the driver for your growth and the driver for the growth of society as a whole. I'm going to close the whiteboard now and see. I know I've been talking for a very long time, and I actually it may surprise you that I'm not that fond of just talking at people. I'm going to see if anyone's actually there and listening. Does anyone have any questions or any comments or anything that they'd like to raise about this?
Well, I completely agree. So it was really nice to see it in a formatted way and based off a system, because that's exactly the way that I'm personally thinking as well. In order for us to achieve our goals, we firstly really need to make sure that people eat well, that they move well, and then based off that, that also we keep our resources within each other. So let's say if we create, I don't know, food, why not let my neighbor make it, So like it needs to flow within us, because we can't continue to comply to government's rules that are not in our own benefit. And so
government represents kind of structure in this, and structure has some advantages. It kind of makes things efficient in a certain way, but it also makes things harder to adapt, harder to change, harder to respond. And it has another cost as well, which is that where you've got these kind of lots of these little specialized systems, every handoff between them, either of energy or information, is lossy. So there's a little bit lost in every step. So we want absolutely to be as close to what we need as possible. Yeah. Anyone else have any? Okay. So the other question from the chat is, what is the name of the model framework I was referring to? So that model is called Keneffing, and I'm going to write it in the chat because it's a Welsh word, so it's spelt strangely. It is, hold on, everyone, right. So yeah, so it's Keneffing, C-Y-N-E-F-I-N. And it was developed by a man called Dave Snowden, who worked for IBM in organizational change on the basis of complexity theory and network theory. I think it's a really useful model, and I've extended it to the personal and to the realm of cyclic change, because what I haven't shared with you, I haven't really got time to go into, but I'll leave as a little teaser, is that change model is a cycle. Complex adaptive systems are made up of cycles and cycles and cycles within cycles. So the real key to understanding this and understanding how we keep them sustainable, how we keep them in service of us and in service of the wider world, because that is another complex adaptive system on which we are dependent. So if we have an interest in our own survival, we have an interest in the world's survival. We have to understand the cyclic nature of these things. And the Keneffing model, actually understood as a cycle of learning and then of action, is a really, really powerful way of understanding effective change. Does anyone have anything else they would like to add? Okay. Well, what I will do is I will share a little bit about how you can get in touch with me. I work with people who are trying to create purpose-driven change. I specifically work around services because that fits my working background. But what I'm really, really interested in doing is bringing together this world of business, technology, and science with the world of consciousness, phenomenology, art, and creativity. And the thing I really love about the complexity framework is it gives me a place to do that. It gives me a place to link those two things. And if there's one thing that you take away from this as a practice, it's play with both sides of that. Explore both sides of that. Try things that are both and, that both make sense in your logical mind, but also really fire up your intuitive mind. And practice switching between the two. See how they relate. Because what you can then do is step back from those two minds, step out of that, and reach the level of the observer consciousness, the stepped back consciousness. And how do we, so to practice switching between the two, that's there are a lot of practices that do that. Anything that gets you thinking and then moving and then being in your embodied self and then using your intuition and then going back to thinking, so cycling through that relationship does it. Music is great for this. Dance is very good for this. So yeah, and anything, I'm trying to think of any other really good practices. Writing can be very good for this. Anything that gets you experiencing your own brain, because that's ultimately the core capability, is like, how can I manage my own brain? And then you can work out how to manage, how to relate to the world. So cooking is great. Yeah. It's very mixed sensory. And then it's about an outcome. It's about doing. So it's absolutely that. Cooking without recipes, ideally. Seeing where, you know, it's a blurry line. But yeah, so if anyone is really interested in the practice of making change, particularly transformational change, then please do get in touch. There aren't that many Matthew Bellringers on LinkedIn. So search for Matthew Bellringer on LinkedIn. I'd love to connect with you. Otherwise, I'll share my email address in the chat. So it's matthew@meaningbit.com. And I will also share a link to the community that I run specifically for people who are doing change-making transformative work. It's a place to, effectively, it's a makerspace for services. It's a place to explore ideas, experiment, and play. So that is called Expressing the Future, and the application link is at, I'm just about to share in the chat, which is meaningbit.com/ETF, Expressing the Future. So that's basically it. I finished a minute early. That's rare. Does anyone have anything they'd like to add?
Thanks for the session.
Thank you.